Okay, cool beans. Today I want to talk about work in progress. We were talking last week about cost of delay and how as you increase your work in progress in inventory, you increase your cost of delay. And there were some really good questions afterwards about how that kind of affects us and actually why is it a bad thing to have large inventory, large work in progress. So I want to talk about that, and then I want to go on to talk about the general concept of waste, in particular in terms of the Toyota production system and obviously Lean, which is associated with that. One kind of really important caveat that I want to kick off with this week is that this isn't just about saying, no, these things are bad, we should never do them. It's about saying there are some things, they have costs associated with them. If we are going to do them, we should do them knowingly. Right, if you remember the first session that we did on workflow design, I said one of the things about this piece of work around workflows is it's about surfacing stuff. It's about taking stuff which is currently shadow, that we can't see, or we all have our own version of, that is implicit, and it's about making it explicit so that we can all work to the same standard. So there's a lovely chat on the financial support channel earlier today about money in emails, and Jeff was saying, well, I think we need these to be before 9 o'clock actually in order for us to complete our service standard. And when he was saying, oh, I'm really sorry that I haven't done it before 9, and we were like, well, actually, this wasn't a request that was made before. We've now surfaced this, we now understand what the standard of the work is, and we can understand how to work together on it, right? So it's productive to surface stuff. So what we're doing in the workflow stuff, and what we're doing talking about waste and work in progress, is we are giving ourselves the opportunity to go through this pattern of behavior change. Insight, choice, change, and repeat. So first you know what you're doing, then you recognize, once you see it, that it's a thing that you've made a choice over, and you could do it differently if you want to, and then you change. So everything's about trade-offs, right? So what we're going to talk about, what I'm going to start by talking about, is why do we want to reduce work in progress? And what are the downsides to increasing work in progress? And how does this apply in particular to knowledge work rather than manufacturing? So you can see that in a manufacturing business, it makes sense that the more work in progress that you have, the more physical raw material which actually takes a significant outlay of capital. You know, you've got to buy some steel or some nickel or some cadmium or plutonium or whatever it is that you're making stuff out of, right? So you have to turn money into stuff, and potentially quite expensive stuff. We obviously don't have capital, we only have time. And all of our products are, intellectual products, right? So there is a question about how exactly having too much inventory begins to affect us. So that's sort of what I want to explore. When we were talking about cost of delay last week, one of the things that we noticed was that cost of delay is proportionate to work in progress. It's not often you get to use the proportional to sign, so I thought I would take that opportunity. And the example that we looked at in particular to explain how cost of delay works was this idea of these 3 different features, each of which took a different length of time to complete, each of which would realize a different value. And we were looking at the scenarios where we work on them sort of all at the same time, or we work on them in some sequence. And this is to do with the point at which we realize value, right? Our work has this kind of shape, right? As a cost of delay curve, it's sort of broadly characterized by, it's something like this, right? There's a big jump in 2 senses. One, there's a big jump when potentially we lose all the value of the work, but also we can't ship pieces of our work incrementally. Not with the current products that we have. A tax credit claim is either done and completed and the value can be realized, similarly with a grant, or it's in progress. We can't, as if we were, say, a software business, put one feature in, ship the product, put another feature in, ship the product kind of incrementally. So we have a situation like this where every time we bring in a piece of work, we bring in something where we need to realize the value. I'll come back to that in a second. I'll come back to that in a second. So cost of delay specifically, it's kind of a difficult concept to actually get your head around. What does it mean? The name is one of these kind of terms of art. It's not necessarily super helpful. So one way of characterizing cost of delay is the kind of key question to ask is, what's the cost of not having this done today? How does this have an impact? What is the adverse impact of not having completed this particular piece of work? So it's very much about thinking about finishing pieces of work. And we're thinking about everything has to be an impact on value. But of course, as we said last week, value is not just necessarily monetary. There are different aspects of value. And basically, we could categorize all value, I would say, in one of 2 kinds, right? Everything is either cash, return on investment, or it's goodwill. And similarly, if we look at the impact of value of not finishing something, we're going to expect it to fall into one of the 4 value quadrants. that we looked at last week. So it's either going to impact cost or it's going to impact benefits, so revenue in a financial sense. And it's either going to improve or protect. So something going to have an impact on value by giving us the opportunity to make more money in the future, giving us the opportunity to continue to make money in the way that we are doing now. Similarly, we can add value by making sure that our current cost base doesn't increase by other people, squeezing us in a way that makes us have to do that, and also by actually improving our current cost base, so making cost savings. And so we have those two dimensions. So these kind of three axes, each of the two dimensions, represent the ways that we can think about cost. Because I remember Amy and I had a conversation about this a couple of weeks ago, about every stage in the process should add value. And you said, well, are we kind of a relationship-driven business? Isn't some of the stuff that we do when we're making client contact building value? And that's absolutely true, because of course that's goodwill, right? Value is something that the client is prepared to pay for. We add value to a piece of work by making it something, adding something that the client is prepared to pay for. Some of the stuff that the client is prepared to pay for is around goodwill, it's around their relationship to us. If we are very professional and friendly and they like working with us, that's something that they're prepared to pay for. But similarly, if we come across in a way that's unprofessional, if we make the client unhappy, then we're removing value. We're taking, so they're prepared to pay for people who don't make them unhappy. If that makes sense, right? So anyway, the different ways that we can think about value. One of the questions that Dan asked in the Q&As last week was, we were talking about if we have 6 months to do a piece of work that's going to take 6 weeks, should we start on it now, or should we wait until 6 weeks before the deadline? How should we schedule it? And obviously, if we have infinite capacity to do work, if we have a piece of work that we could get started on, then we should start on it straight away, because the more pieces of work we do, the more we make money. But if you remember that economics is the study of working under constraints, right? And one of the constraints that we're working on is that our process has one or more bottlenecks within it. So if we have limited capacity, should we start on every piece of work that we can start on, right? Or should we leave things? That's a really interesting question. When we sell work, should we start on it straight away? Remember, the cost of delay is about the cost of not finishing as well as not starting. And so thinking about how work in progress and inventory and cost of delay affects the knowledge business, the time that we put into working on a particular claim is money, right? We're talking at the moment in the pay task force about saying that the total wages for the company should not exceed 40% of revenue, right? And that's a sort of rule of thumb for a healthy target for an agency-driven business. But an agency knowledge-driven business is somewhere where the wages bill is generally the biggest single chunk of the cost base, because what you're doing is knowledge work. So you don't, by and large, have significant capital investment. Obviously, things are changing with new projects like the Treehouse, but if we think of tax credits and grants, where most of the people in the business are working, that's the case. Right? And with those pieces of work, until they're finished, like those features that we saw in the example last week, this slide would have been better 4 slides ago, I apologize for that. Anyway, until the piece of work is finished, we have a 0 rate of return on the cash that we're investing through our time in a piece of work. And core management of cash flow is how businesses go bankrupt, right? The ongoing health of the business, particularly as we begin to do more interesting, exciting things with our cash reserves, and we start to, whittle away that healthy bank balance that we had to something that's more like, what is it, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, like the number of months of wage bill, the number of months of cost base that we have in hand goes down as we start to invest up, right? Then we have to be much more careful about managing our cash and thinking, well, how are we going to realize the value that we've invested in? So Kanban, which is one of the organizational tools that comes out of Toyota, which is a system of kind of managing work through stages. One of the fundamental principles in Kanban is that you prioritize moving work into the final stage. The final stage is where you make the money. And again, that's a manufacturing business. So you're making a car, so it's a thing that you can't ship half finished. You have a significant investment and then it's done and you can make money. So yeah, Kanban says that you always prioritize finishing. So again, coming back to this discussion about money in, right? This is actually a really nice example of bottlenecks and queuing theory. We were talking about this, and Jeff was saying, well, look, in order to press on with invoicing and stuff like that, we want to do that at the start of the day if we can. So we need to know if there's been money in by 9 o'clock, when most of us are going to be sort of getting in and expecting to start work. Right, now that's the very end of the process. the point at which we've had the money in, we're so close to making the money on this ourselves, so close to realizing the value that we can smell it. We can almost feel the used fibers in our fingers at this point. Right? We're really, really close to the end. And there's not actually very much that we have to do. We have to send the money in email, we have to contact the client, generate the invoice, but it's quite a small piece of work for which we will realize a very large amount of value. Now, if you have a team of 8 or 9 people who are potentially sitting waiting to pick up that piece of work and realize value, to say, okay, every day there will be one designated person who is expected to check the money in. Well, what if they forget? What if they've got the flu? What if their child is sick? What if their boiler is broken? What if they oversleep? There are all kinds of reasons why it's kind of crazy to say we should have 8 people working or waiting on one person. We've artificially created a bottleneck. I remember when we were talking about bottlenecks a few weeks ago that one of the first things that you should do is say, well, do we have existing resources that we can use more effectively? And we do, because it's not just one person who has access to the bank accounts. It's not just one person who can do the money in stuff. It's kind of 6 or 7 people, and it's going to become 8 or whatever. So actually, we should probably have a system that says, well, the first person who's awake checks the client. First of all, check Slack and see has anybody said, oh, I've done the money in email. And if not, they do the money in email, and then they tell client managers and the people with bank account access, it's done. Right? So rather than have this artificial bottleneck where one person does the process, we create a queue where anybody who has capability to service that work can pick it up. And that means that we realize value faster because we finish the work quicker. One of the ways that we want to think about this in particular, about prioritizing the final stage, about finishing the work, is this idea of weighted shortest job first. I did say a few weeks ago that this whole area of workflow is a sea of acronyms. So here's another one for you. Weighted shortest job first.
Can you repeat that?
Weighted shortest job first.
Okay.
So you could imagine that you would have shortest job first. Do you remember
weighted as in like the weights?
Exactly.
Weighted
yes,
shortest job first.
Yeah.
Way hard thinking.
So remember that the one way of doing it is shortest first. So which is the one that's going to quick value. Weighted shortest job first is this sort of CD3, cost of delay divided by duration. It's about tall work versus wide work. Work which has a long time to completion but a relatively small value versus work which has a short time to completion but a relatively high value. And understanding the ratio between those two. If you have the extreme case, very wide or very tall, it's obvious to do the very tall. But if you have different squares, which one is better? So this is where cost of delay comes in and allows us to say, of the pieces of work that we have in the system, right, of the jobs that we have on the go at any one time, what's the weighted shortest job? And we should do that. So there are, so this is one of the ways in which work in progress is problematic, because the more pieces of work that we have, the more cash we've sunk into inventory. And cost of delay and weighted shortest job first and various other things that we're starting to engage with are a great way of managing that. But there are some other ways in which work in progress can be problematic. The first of which is context switching. Right? The more work in progress you have, the more context you have within your system that you have to hold. And one of the things about being an individual is that the more context you hold, the more jobs you have on the go, particularly at any one time, the less opportunity you have to be in flow because you're switching between stuff. And less flow means less productivity. People are both more productive because they're more focused when they're in flow. But flow is also probably the closest thing that we can describe to, like if we had to characterize happiness, happiness is probably being in a state of flow. Like being in a state of flow is probably the ultimate state that you can put your mind in. So if we want to say that work should be a route to self-actualization, work should be a route to fulfillment, to discovering yourself and expressing yourself and reaching your potential, offering ourselves the chance to be in flow as much as we can is a great way of doing this. And obviously the happier we are, right, the more productive we become in turn. So there's a kind of double effect on increasing productivity by decreasing context. And if you think about this, the more context you have, right, the longer, the higher the switching cost becomes. So the more tasks you have on your to-do list, the more complicated it becomes to switch between those tasks. And we can kind of, but like one way I was thinking about this as I was coming here, which is, if you have an end-to-end bike journey that's going to take you 20 minutes if you don't stop at all, right? Somewhere along the way, you're probably going to have a red light that you're going to have to stop at. Now, what is the cost to you of stopping at that red light? Are you going to stop at that red light for 30 seconds? Does it add 30 seconds to your journey? Probably adds more like a minute, right? Because you've got to slow down to get to the lights, and then once the lights have turned, you've got to re-accelerate again and get back up to speed. As opposed to if the light had been green, you're just going to cruise through at your average all the way. So stopping and starting pieces of work has that same effect on us. We don't just add to the total length that a job takes by stopping and starting the wait time in between. There is a ramp down and a ramp up on either side that we have to factor in, right? So there is an increased delay. Here's a nice quote. Imitating that. No, let's come on to the next line. There's a nice quote from Joel Spolsky which says, if you give one job to a person, they just sort of get it done. If you give two, they do nothing, right? Because which do I work on? I'm kind of switching between the two. Where am I going? What am I going to achieve? And then this is the sort of statistic that you see cited quite a lot. These guys did a study for the University of Illinois and Microsoft where they were looking at kind of working habits, and they said, we do this thing during the day where we're in the middle of the task, and we just go and check our email, or check Slack, or do whatever, or check our Apple Watch. And what we discover is it takes 15 minutes to return to the task that we were in. This is, you see statistics like this all the time. And an interesting way of looking at how, how this. If you've got, just sort of illustrating the cost of illustrating the kind of cost of context switching. If you had, two tasks, each of which are going to take you 10 units of time, right, A and B, if you did them sequentially like this, right, you finish A after 10 seconds, or 10 units, and you finish B after 20 units, giving you an average time per task of 15. Right? If instead we chopped them up like this, so we did 1 unit of each task, alternating backwards and forwards until we were done, right? Well, then what would happen is we would finish A, 1 unit, because the penultimate unit is going to be in A, and the final unit is going to be a B. So we will finish the penultimate unit after 19 seconds. Oh my God, writing back to front is really hard. I have so much more respect for teachers than I did. I've got quite a lot of respect for teachers. Let's see, is that... Yeah, that's not a 9, is it? Okay. Is it like that? Yeah, okay. So instead, it took until 19 to finish A and until 20 to finish B. So thinking about what we know about cost of delay and doing things like this, we see, well, actually, the average time to finish a particular task has now gone up to 18 and a half? 19 and a half? Which looks something like that. But then this is assuming that there's no cost of switching in between the two. So if instead we said that there's a little delay like a little cost that we have to do of task switching, and we say, okay, well it's not actually very high cost, and it stays the same no matter how many times you change, and it's half a unit. So in that case, in this model, right, we finish A after 10, and we finish B after waiting for A, and then the cost of task switching, and then the 10 that the task takes. So we finish B after 20.5. So there's a slight increase in the average, but it's not very much. But you can see here, we have all of these extra weights in between. We have all of these extra costs of switch that we have to add on, which affect both the time at which we deliver each piece of work and therefore realize the value, but also the average time it takes us to finish stuff. And if one of the things that our clients want us to do, and clients generally do want this in any kind of industry, whether it's a product or a service, is they want stuff that they've asked for as soon as possible, and ideally now. So if the average time that it takes us to work on stuff goes up, you can see that we therefore our service level potentially goes down. So it's just an interesting illustration of how the cost of switching between tasks can add up very quickly. So this kind of picks up the same idea. The more pieces you have on the go at any one particular time, the more things you have on your to-do list, the likelihood is that there will therefore be, because you've got 10 things to do, you'll pick up 1, you'll pick up 2, you'll pick up 3. There's a longer cycle. There are longer gaps between each time that you're working on one particular piece of work. the longer that gap is, the more time there is for you to have forgotten everything that you knew about that piece of work, or if not everything, at least for there to be a significant decay in the amount that you remember. So the more projects, this is from a book on management techniques in software, what you find is that the more projects that people work on, the more of their time becomes waste, because it takes them longer to get started. That ramp up and ramp down time becomes longer. Another way in which work in progress can slow us down is that it creates noise in the system, right? If we're thinking about weighted shorted job first, which is the most important piece of work right now, like at this second, which piece of work in the tax credit pipeline is most important? It's kind of hard for us to know. One of the reasons it's hard for us to know is because there are so many pieces, right? So there's a lot of noise there. How do we get to that information? And there's also, and I put this up sort of slightly flippantly, there's also the sense that actually as the system that you're in becomes busier and busier, your stress level goes up. And as your stress level goes up, your ability to engage with work and know what's going on goes down. This is the reason why I'm now trying this technique from Agile, from managing my to-do list, of having a backlog of limited items. If I start to have more than about 10 items on there, then I have to start taking things off, because there comes a point where, and this was how I used to manage stuff before when I had a to-do list in Trello, the to-do list becomes so big that it becomes frightening, and you're like, I'm really stressed, I'm really busy, I've got lots of things to do. Which is the most important thing for you to do? Then maybe you should do that. I don't know which the most important thing is to do, and I'm so stressed that I couldn't possibly work it out. Right? That's a little trap that it's possible for human beings to get into. And the more work in progress you introduce to a system, the more likelihood that it is either as an individual or as a team that you become subject to that. So it's just thinking about managing that. There's also a case that the more work in progress that you have, the more you have to keep records. Right? If we had a single piece flow, if it was possible with the kind of the work that we do to just pick up a claim, run it all the way through, and then put it down and it's done end to end, we would need a CRM with precisely two buttons. One button that says, I have picked a piece of work up from the queue of work to be started, and one button that says, I have finished that piece of work and it's now done. And then we need to maybe remind us to do a piece of work again the next year. But we wouldn't need anything else, because we wouldn't need to write anything down, because we would, this is a concept that we may have talked about before, common knowledge. Common knowledge is the stuff that I know and you know, and I know that you know and you know that I know, etc. So we can rely on knowing together. This is kind of hive mind thing. I find a really nice way of thinking about that is if you're trying to cook a meal with somebody else, right? Too many cooks spoil the broth. Well, if you don't want to spoil the broth, the best way to do it is for you to both stand side by side so that you can see what the other person is doing. So, if I'm like, oh, could you chop up 4 cloves of garlic and then I'll fry them and then I'll do something else while you're doing that. If you're there chopping up the garlic, chop, 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 then I can see that you're putting salt on the garlic, which is a great technique, by the way, because the salt acts like a sandpaper on the knife and gives you a finer cutting. But I can see that you're salting the garlic. So I know that if I add more salt as soon as it goes in the pan, it will be over-salted. So we don't have to have the context switch of you handing over the information to me, I had salted this garlic, I've seen it, we have common knowledge. So we're able to work together with 4 hands, but with the kind of efficiency of one person. So we don't have any of that inefficiency costs. So there is a cost to maintaining common knowledge, and that cost goes up the more pieces of work that we have to maintain between us as a group. Work in progress also represents a risk, right? Now this doesn't happen to us very often. I don't think this is a big thing for us, but it's worth thinking about as well. Once we've started work on something, we've sunk some cost into it, and there's always a chance that we won't realise any value because the client goes bankrupt, or because we're asking for information from us that they don't supply us in time and the work falls off the cliff and we can't submit it. Or the work is abandoned for some other reason, they get bought out, the person who was our contact changes jobs, the person who's replacing them isn't interested in talking to us, and we might have sunk hours of our time into that. So that's another thing to think about. The larger the volume of work in progress you have, the more risk that you have. There was some stuff that I wanted to talk about more about waste and where this fits in. I don't think there's time for that this week because obviously we started a bit late, so I might push that to next week, which is better because it gives me longer to be prepared for that, which is fantastic. But I will trail that very slightly by saying one of the concepts in the Toyota production system, which is familiar to most people as lean and then agile, derived from that, is that everything either adds value, everything either does something to the product, transforms the product in a way that increases the price that the customer will pay for it, or it's a form of waste. And the forms of waste in Toyota come in three kinds: non-standardization, uneven workflow, i.e. having kind of bottlenecks, having a non-smooth flow, and the kinds of inefficiency, which are the 7 wastes of lean, which is sometimes referred to as the 8 wastes. So I'm going to skip through that. I'm going to just come to this final slide. So remember that I started by saying this is about making intelligent and informed trade-offs rather than saying that things are fundamentally wrong. All of this is just about exposing the fact that for various reasons, for various genuine and real reasons, there are costs associated with work in progress, and the more work in progress that you have, the higher those costs are. But that doesn't mean that it's wrong for us to incur those costs. We should just do it knowingly, and we should do it as a trade-off for some other value. So some things like, some things to think about if we say, well, look, we have to have all of this work in progress because, we've got a queue of information from the client, and if we've sold the client, it's really important that we start working on it straight away. Okay, well, some things to think about. We say we have to. Do we have to? Or is it just how we do it now? Can we reconceptualize stuff? Can we step outside the paradigm that we've created for ourselves and consider other options? If we do, is there a way that we can manage it more creatively? So one way would be to sort of have a step zero. So what we do is, after a piece of work has been sold, we get in touch with the client and we basically don't really begin work on it. We don't move it into anybody's queue, but we get in touch with them in a way that makes them feel that the work is progressing. And if they then respond and are a responsive client and want to really crack on with stuff, then we bring the work into the queue and then we start working on it. If they're the sort of client we don't think about or they don't respond to us, then we maybe don't actually start actively chasing them until nearer the time when the claim needs to be filed. So that's one possible way of doing it. And there are other things which say, okay, well, if we have to admit all of this work in progress to the front end, if we have to bring it in, is there more that we can do, thinking about all of the stuff that we've been talking about over preceding weeks and all of the work that people have been doing in bits and pieces previously that's hopefully starting to come together and coalesce into something systematic? Can we do more to reduce the work in progress load by having efficiency, by making things go out the other end quicker? All of the things that we're trying to do, the accounting partnerships and the self-service, all that exciting stuff. So it's not that things are bad, it's about framing a conversation and giving us something to talk about and asking us to be creative and to look again at the way that we do things. Any questions? Or comments? Or
I have a comment actually, something which may be obvious to some people. It wasn't obvious to me, and I thought of this while listening to this talk, which is the really interesting interaction between this work in progress concept and the slack in the system. Because we're saying that without the ability, so if we do too much context switching, we increase the costs, we increase the load on the amount of work in progress, the amount of inventory. We increase the costs on the business. We make it a worse service because it takes longer to deliver to clients. There's all sorts of costs to having high amounts of work in progress. But the only way to decrease this time of delivery requires some amount of slack in the system so that we can organize things more efficiently from the point of view of the work rather than from the point of view of the person. And I think there's a natural tendency for everybody to want to look around and see that everyone is 100% utilized or 120% utilized. And if people aren't working really hard, that means that we're doing something wrong. Actually, this makes the opposite fairly counterintuitive point that if everybody's 120% utilized, we're probably delivering inferior service compared to what we should be delivering. Because we're causing more work in progress, we're probably requiring more context switching for people to help each other, and we don't have the slack to be able to really process stuff efficiently.
Yeah, if you remember when we started on the workflow series 3, I said there are some counterintuitive truths in workflow stuff when you start to look at finding efficiency, stuff that runs very counter to prevailing views and the techniques of management techniques of Henry Ford or whatever. And actually one of those is that yes, an efficient system involves every stage of the process that is not a bottleneck sitting idle for some period of time. Any bottleneck should be at 100% utilization all the time because the bottleneck continues processing. They use that in order to catch up. There is a fantastic metaphor that's often used here of the relay race. Oh, I've got a prop that I'm holding, brilliant. In a relay race, the race is won not by a runner, but by the baton. The baton, right? Sorry, I've been watching Toast of London, so anyway, the baton, yeah. So it has to cross the finish line. Now you have, let's say, 4 people who have to take it on this journey. What is the best way for them to do this? For the person, there's obviously the person who's at the start, sets off holding the baton. The second person who they're waiting for, what should they do? Should they stand there, idly, actively doing nothing, waiting for the moment at which they're needed to service a piece of work and move it towards the finish line when you potentially win and realise some value, a medal, hooray? Or should they do something else in order to stay busy? You know, should they jump up and down or run in another race or... Right? So there is a sense in which if you have a stage in a relay race that you're responsible for and there's nothing for you to do at this particular point in time, then you should do nothing rather than be busy. But doing nothing might, doesn't have to literally mean doing nothing, although it can mean doing nothing. And I hope that we're kind of becoming a mature enough organisation to recognise that if somebody's like, actually, do you know what, I don't have to do anything for the next hour and a half, so rather than pretend to be busy, I'm just going to go and hang out in the kitchen and talk to people, right? And that's a valuable thing to do. And if you can make up that time somewhere else, you'll have a day when you're here until 10:30 at night. So who cares? But there's also a sense in which that time might just be stuff that you do some work that isn't part of the value chain. So that might be the time where you do work on the pay model, or that you go and have a chat to Pippa about finding the voice of GrantTree, or whatever the other bits and pieces that we're all called on to do. Anybody else?
I was curious about, I think I always ask, this is always my question with everything, is just
Bring it on.
What next? What next in terms of this information being able to be, how to get the most impact out of this information, like what work can be done, how does it relate to work that's currently happening?
What is your question? I think Brian's going to answer it.
Well, I can at least provide some input. On the sales process, we are putting this into practice. So we're taking what we learned from the last one, met with Andrew, since what was followed up, and then this new stuff here. So we had a meeting today, and we're trying to map this back to our actual problems. So in terms of, we're just trying to link it and learning a bit more today. We have another meeting next week, so the link is there at one side, and should there's another position. That's one place of business.
And tax credits?
I can sort of fill you in. We had a little chat about cost of delay, and this is sort of the extension to that. In terms of how we get it to actually work, the next step is figuring out how we apply it and then experimenting with that. That will just be a bit of sort of, just figuring out sort of stage. Once we kind of get there, have a few experiments, then we'll be able to have a better understanding of how we can actually use it. But that step of actually figuring out how to apply it is a bit sort of tricky because we need to sort of model what we have and then sort of make sure we're not going to be too deep in terms of our details, but then at that right level we can actually do something. It's a bit hard to say, but yeah, we're going to try and fit it somehow.
Cool, so the first bit now is this modelling work, the existing workflow.
Yeah.
Oh, wicked. Thank you.
So I think there's potentially lots of work that can be done on this, and what will be the thing that works for us, and what will be the thing that actually takes hold and we do, I don't know. But, part of the aim of this, as I say in previous week, I didn't say it on the slide this week, was this is about providing some knowledge, some tools, some vocabulary to enable some collaboration on this to arise. And I continue to be around to help and advise people on that collaboration, but my aim is very much not to drive this myself, because I see working on the workflow as an opportunity for us to expand self-management and for control to be, for everybody's control over not just their work, but their workflow to increase through this, and for people to start to feel that they have confidence and ability to change stuff. So one of the things that I was saying in the 3 types of waste, the first type of waste, which is Muri or Mura, which is the non-standardization. surfacing, just like with the money and stuff needs to be done with online work, we're defining a standard work. That's great, because what that then means is that anybody can say, well, what's the impact of that standard work? How does that affect my working day? How does that affect stuff upstream and downstream? Do I want to change that? Do I want to deviate from that? Are there reasons for it? We make this stuff surface and we bring it up and we're able to say, okay, this is actually what our processes are, you know? And from there, not only do we start to be able to do things like, you know, because we surface them by having discussions that we frame through concepts like cost of delay and work in progress. And from there, we get to a point at which actually a structure of the business that's built around the work begins to emerge. Right? We started out by saying we were going to have hierarchy. That was going to be the structure of the business that we were going to have from which the work was going to emerge. And it's not really worked for us for a couple of reasons. One of which is that we weren't ready for it because we hadn't worked out what the structure of the work was. So we were trying to put in the final piece when there was nothing for it to rest on. But also, you know, we designed the final piece first, and actually what should happen is that the final piece should come last, because it has to, as Don likes to point out, like the advice that we get from Stephen Cohen is that the structures of your work should arise from your work and should support your work rather than being imposed down. That's the value, or one of the values, of a self-managing organisation that makes it a more efficient business, a business that is able to do more than a top-down one where processes are imposed by people who aren't doing and don't necessarily understand the work. Does that answer your question?
All three. Thank you very much.
Teamwork.
On a scale of 1 to 10, how happy are you that the colour of your hoodie today?
I was just going to compliment that.
The slides you had on the board.
It's not, I'm not going to lie, it's not as aubergine as I hoped it was going to be.
I have to agree.
So you say it's an 8, 7?
Did I do my best today to wear a hoodie that matched the colour of my slides? Yes, 8 out of 10. I did the best because I wore the most aubergine hoodie that I could, and it was an aubergine hoodie that I had specifically bought. Well, not specifically bought because it matched the slides. I did go on the Uniqlo website thinking, what if they've got an aubergine hoodie? And it's like, better than that, they've got a Keith Haring hoodie and it's on sale. So I was like, well, the universe wants me to wear this hoodie.
Thank you.
Best question. That was the...
Quite brilliant. Thanks very much, everybody.